Carr, Field Service Manager here at Torn Drive International. These are the tools you're going to need to adjust the emergency brake. A variac, a small screwdriver, feeler gauges, 13 millimeter wrench, an adjustable wrench, and a 30 millimeter wrench. Using the 30 millimeter wrench, adjust the torque on the emergency brake. It needs to be set to specifications. If your machine is a 2,500 pound machine, it should be set to 16 to 18 millimeters. If it is a 3,500 pound machine, it should be set to 24 to 26 millimeters. Using the 30 millimeter wrench and the adjustable wrench, loosen the lock nuts on each end of the coil and center it between the arms on the emergency brake. Be sure to measure your coil to make sure it is centered between the arms. With the coil centered, lock down the coil into position using the 30 millimeter wrench and the adjustable wrench. Lock down the nut on the machine side of the coil. Using a feeler gauge, check to make sure your gap is between 1.2 and 2.5 millimeters between your plunger and the coil. After you have this set, use the 30 millimeter wrench and the adjustable wrench to lock the lock nut down on the front of the machine on your coil. At this time, you need to pick the brake. You may use your controller to pick the brake. We are using a variac. At this time, we are hooking up our wires and using the variac to pick the brake. Using a 13 millimeter wrench, loosen the lock nuts on each of your stroke adjustment bolts. Then, check your brake gap using a 0.05 millimeter feeler gauge to set your gap. It should be the same on each side. After you have set your gap and it is 0.05 millimeters on each side, lock your stroke adjustment bolts back down using the 13 millimeter wrench. Recheck your gap using your feeler gauge to make sure it is 0.05. If it is not, you will have to go back and redo the last step with setting the brake stroke. At this time, de-energize your brake. Adjust your brake switch so that a 1 millimeter feeler gauge, when squeezed between the switch and the rod, will not trigger the switch, but a 2 millimeter feeler gauge will trigger the switch. After you have adjusted your pick switch, lock the bolts down using the adjustable wrench. And this will complete the process.